Journeys of Hope. Life is a journey, and this is your spiritual passport. Where will the journey take us today? Let's walk together as we learn to become people of faith and hope.
Welcome to Journeys of Hope. I'm Mary Jane Fox, your guide for today's journey. I am the co-director at Pilgrim Center of Hope, where we are recording at St. Joseph Studio. Pilgrim Center of Hope, producer of this weekly radio and podcast program, is a nonprofit evangelization ministry founded in 1993 with the mission of guiding people to walk in hope with Christ and the Church. Our journey of hope today is the journey with the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem. Its members are called Knights and Dames of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem. This papal order dates back to the time of the Crusades. It's the only lay institution of the Vatican State charged with the task of providing for the needs of the Latin Patriarchate of Jerusalem and of all the activities and initiatives to support the Christian presence in the Holy Land. Our journey today, you're going to hear the story on how this order began during the time of the Crusades. You'll learn what each member is committed to and what they do to help the church in the Holy Land stay alive and be inspired by what they represent and do in the name of all Catholic Christians. My guests today are members of this organization. They are Denny and Barbara Alvey. Welcome, Dennis and Barbara. I'm so glad you joined me, and you have been members for quite some time. What attracted you to become members of the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem?
I'm not sure it was attracted. As you know, most of us don't know about the order, and we had never heard of the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre until someone said, here's a book, once you read up on it, you might want to become a member of this organization. Subsequently, we were nominated by our pastor, and we'll go through, that process later. But after we read the book, we were enthralled by what the organization the order is all about. But I think Barbara has some comments about when we were actually invested, what happened.
Yes, I bet that's interesting. I heard a little bit about it before we met in person, and I was quite impressed, Barbara.
Well, it was certainly an experience that it was nothing like you ever think about. In your head you have this idea about things, and it was just a wonderful religious experience that doesn't leave you.
Mm-hmm. So, what you're living in San Antonio, Texas now, but you were living up north in the northern states, and you were members of of the order that's divided by lieutenancies. Well, we'll talk about that a little bit later. But you were actually up north in the Mid-Atlantic Lieutenancy, met in amazing places like the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception in Washington, D.C., met more like having masses is what I'm trying to refer to. Yeah. So how long have you become members? When were you first invested?
We were invested in 1987, and there's a little bit of a very nice story about that. As you know, the investment process, we were already nominated and approved for membership, but it was the same year that the Pope visited San Antonio, and we had the Equestrian Order had a place of honor. So even though we weren't members yet, we sat with the other members very close up to the altar. So that was a good beginning.
It was,
if you will.
Right.
And in terms of the Middle Atlantic Lieutenancy, which we were a member of for 4 years, we actually joined here, obviously in '87. As you said, we had masses at the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception, but we had annually something different than what we do locally. We all get scrolls of our investiture in the order, but we get them 6 months after we actually become members. There, that ceremony was a mass, and it was at the Franciscan monastery of the Holy Land of America, which is really right across the street from the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception. And we had other events there, too. Our investitures were in the cathedral, but our other activities took place in those two places.
So already we're hearing about this order that is quite ancient. We're going to hear about it in a minute, the history. But people are probably thinking, oh my goodness, scrolls and investiture, and this is terminology that we're not really used to in an organization within the Catholic Church. But there's an incredible history here that I just can't wait to share with others. Let's talk about let's go back to the beginning, okay? Because it's incredible.
All right. Well, I would like to start before the beginning. What led up to what became the order. And I think we have to start with AD 70. As Christ had predicted, the Romans took over Jerusalem. That's the first part. But fast forward 250 years, and there was a mother-son combination that really started things, if you will. St. Helen or St. Helena, I guess in today's terminology, she would have been doing an archaeological dig at a temple in Jerusalem, and she discovered 3 crosses. She took 3 of them and placed them on a person that was ill, and 2 of them, nothing happened, but when the 3rd cross touched the person was healed. That's the true cross of Christ. And at the same time, her son, who was the first Christian Roman emperor, Constantine, started building a church at that place, and it was called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And then fast forward another almost 300 years, that temple was destroyed by the Persians and rebuilt. And then in 1009, it was destroyed again by the mad Caliph of Cairo, al-Hakim. And then there was kind of a peaceful allowance of the Christians to stay in the area for a few more years. But then the Seljuk Turks really became persecutors of Christianity, and that led to uproar in Europe, if you will, to do something about it. So in 1095, Pope Urban II authorized, I guess, the amalgamation of various armies from the various countries. I'm using current terms, army. I guess they were not armies at that time, but knights, if you will. They all kind of met in the Jerusalem area, and there was a gentleman by the name of Godfrey of Bouillon, who was the overall commander. In today's terms, that you could equate that to current wars where we have various countries involved, but they usually pick one commander to lead an overall front. So Godfrey was the man, and they were successful in 1099 in overthrowing the Muslims and retaking, if you will, the city of Jerusalem and establishing the Latin Order at that point in time, and the Equestrian Order. It wasn't called that immediately, but they stayed around to protect the facilities there. That's exactly how the order came about. And I have a few more words on that, I think, later when
there's so much to this. The history is incredible. When we think of actually that time period, Constantine, and you really started in the very beautiful sequence, and the first Christian emperor, Constantine, moving 300 years forward, the Crusades. But, there were Christians. The Turks, you said that was a really bad part of how they treated the Christians not so well. They either they were martyred or they were taken to slavery. And so the Pope, hearing about this, as you said, was really preaching throughout Europe and asking for prayer and for this crusade, a crusade of prayer and a crusade of action to protect the Christians who were going there to venerate the tomb of Christ. Godfrey was a devout Catholic, and I understand, as I was reading his life story, he was an interesting French knight. He came from a noble family and was dedicated to this mission of saving the Holy Sepulchre. But he always had like a battle cry. You know, the knights that gathered around him, small number at first. I think there were like 20 or so, and then it grew. But the battle cry was, "God wills it." And in Latin, of course, it's, you know, Dios lo volt, Dios lo volt. And I think that motto is a beautiful motto. It's still alive and vibrant, used by the knights and dames even today in their prayer, "God wills it," which really calls, I think you both would agree, an act of obedience to the church, to Christ and the church, but an act of humility, of an act of faithfulness and believing that this is truly God's plan, the knights and dames of the Holy Sepulchre, to be so vibrant and active in serving the church in the Holy Land. So that battle cry was really and true and indeed a very interesting one. Now, the Jerusalem cross is a very big part of the knights and dames of the Holy Sepulchre. And it's mentioned as the banner of the knight's shield. As a matter of fact, it was in their flag, on their knighthood. How did this Jerusalem cross come to be named Jerusalem Cross? Or can you please describe it, Dennis and Barbara?
Yes, we could have called it the Godfrey Cross. From what I've read, that it was the coat of arms of the Godfrey family. And side story on that, today the coat of arms flag still flies from his home in Bouillon, which is on the river between Belgium and France. And there's also a statue of Godfrey in one of the main squares in Brussels. So at that time it was a gold on silver shield, and that's what was his coat of arms. And when the Holy Sepulchre was formed, if you will, it became the coat of arms of the order, and it was renamed the Jerusalem Cross. And it also became red in nature. And to describe that cross, it's actually a Latin cross with 4 crosses on the 4 arms, if you will, of the larger cross. And those 5 crosses, if you will, there are various interpretations, but Godfrey said they were representative of the 5 wounds of Christ. So that's going from a Godfrey cross to the Jerusalem cross that we know today.
So it really says a lot about this man Godfrey, who was a knight who responded to the Pope's call to save the Holy Sepulchre, and thus started the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem, but also the Jerusalem cross. And many of us have seen it. We've seen it. We know some of us wear it on chains. It's become it's a Christian symbol, the Jerusalem cross. Now, it's interesting that you mentioned that it was first called the Godfrey cross, and it was on his family armor, his family shield. It's and you mentioned the significance, the five wounds of Christ. I know that I've also been told that the main Latin cross, the main thick cross in the middle, represents the side of his wound, and then each small cross is one from each wrist where he was crucified, and then for each foot. Of course, that's very obvious, but I think it's important to note that because when the knights took it as part of their banner, their shield, that's Jerusalem cross, it became red, as you said, and red because of representing the passion of Christ, the blood of Christ, which I think is also very interesting to note. So there are other, I heard of a couple other explanations of the Jerusalem cross, and this was told by a Franciscan in Jerusalem. He said, well, some of us also say that the Jerusalem cross represents that from Jerusalem, the main cross, the good news went out to the 4 corners of the world, and also that the 4 smaller cross represents the 4 Gospels, which are, of course, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Jesus representing, of course, the center of the Gospel. I thought that was very interesting. Again, all being very united with with Christ himself, pointing to Jesus.
They're all good explanations.
Oh, aren't they?
Yes.
Aren't they? But I like, my favorite one is the one you mentioned, Dennis, is the five wounds of Christ. We cannot forget that's the Holy Sepulchre is the tomb of Christ. It is the tomb of Christ in Jerusalem. Christians have lost their lives traveling there from Europe by ship, wanting for months to travel to Jerusalem to just see the tomb, to kiss it, to touch it. Some were killed there by, as you said, the Turks, and some became slaves. But now we today can interestingly, beautifully, and freely go to the Holy Sepulchre. Let's continue with this is a very interesting part of the history that took place in Jerusalem. What happened after the Knights retook the Holy Sepulchre, the tomb of Christ? There was more like official recognition from the Pope. Can we talk about that?
Sure. First, I should say that Godfrey himself only lived a year after,
right.
and he died, and his brother Baldwin I became the king of Jerusalem, if you will, which Godfrey had refused to say that he was the king. He said only Christ is the king. And Baldwin actually wrote the first constitution of the order, and that's actually, I'm told, preserved to this day. I haven't seen it, so anyway. After he wrote that Constitution, it took a little longer than Rome takes today. It was 1113 when Paschal II actually approved the Equestrian Order as an order under the Church, and then 9 years later, Callistus, am I pronouncing his name right?
Yes.
Pope II, and everybody seems to be a second. He actually officially said that the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre were in charge of preserving the relics in the Holy Land.
Well, I wanted to ask you more about that history because I think what was going on, that there was a religious community there that they were also protecting, that were praying at the Holy Sepulchre, and the Franciscans.
Yes.
So the Franciscans were present because St. Francis of Assisi went to the Holy Land in around that time period, or the 1100s, and so they started to become like the custodians, meaning caring and welcoming pilgrims, praying, having liturgies in the Holy Sepulchre, and they knew of the Knights.
That's very true, and in 1342, in fact, Clement V committed the care of the Holy Land to the Franciscans, and I'm maybe getting a little ahead of ourselves because this is after the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre had been forced to depart the area.
Right, exactly. So this Pope Callistus II, who issued this official documentation, he was really, again, defending Christianity against the Muslim attacks at that time. And the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem, as you said, was being established. The documentation was being established for the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem. The Knights were now playing a more integral role in advancing peace in the territory. And I think we need to emphasize that, don't we? That the Knights were there for peace. They were there to protect the Holy Sepulchre tomb. Is this one church? We're not talking about trying to take over this whole geographical land. That was the initial focus, but it was all about prayer and peace in that territory, and to defend the Holy Sepulchre. So it again, because it was the site of the crucifixion and the burial place, the tomb. Dennis, you mentioned that Constantine built the first church, and then it was destroyed and rebuilt. That church today still stands. It's an ancient basilica today in Jerusalem, but it covers not only the tomb of Christ, but Calvary.
That's correct.
So at that time, the Knights were realizing that they're protecting the site of not only the Holy Sepulchre, the tomb of our Lord Jesus Christ, but where he actually died on the cross, which is Calvary.
That's correct, and I failed to add, though, one of the most important things. The church that Constantine had built actually was destroyed twice again, and it was the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre who actually reconstructed after they took over Jerusalem what's now the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and it's now 900. The building's 900 years old, although it's been under kind of constant renovation for the last 50 or 60 years.
Exactly, and it all started in the year 326 with Constantine. So imagine walking on that foundation, and some of those foundational stones still date back to the 4th century, and some of the pieces of the rock were pavement and stone walls. It's incredible. It is incredible. We've heard a small part of the history of the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre. Now, when were women allowed into this order? We're hearing a lot about knights here. I think that was talking about going forward into time. We're looking at about 1800, something like that, I think, Barbara?
In 1888, Pope Leo XIII permitted the order to grant membership to women as well as men, and today the terms knights and dames are still used when referring to members of the order. Currently, there's a worldwide membership of around 22,000 knights and dames in 32 countries, and still growing in membership.
Right, that's interesting. And I think, in fact, I've heard a couple of different numbers, 22, 30,000. It's really growing. And it's impressive to know. We're going to find out how is that growth? I mean, how does one become, or as you said, it's not so much that you just say, I want to join and sign a piece of paper. No, there's a lot more to it. We're talking about an order that is the most ancient order and a papal order because it was initiated by the Pope and the knights responded. Now, Barbara, you said something interesting that the women came in 1888. You thought, wow, that's so much more further from when the knights were serving. But, Pope Leo XIII, at that time, he was really ahead of his time. Women, were going through the role of womanhood at that time was going through is challenging, but he knew the role of the vocation of woman as he remembered, of course, as we all do as Christians, how women followed him, Jesus, during his time and assisted him, and they had their role as well. And it was understandable that this new order of the Holy Sepulchre involved not only the knights, but also women called dames. And of course, the Middle East was changing at the time at the end of the Ottoman Empire, and Christians started to migrate. And there was a need to a new approach to the Church of the Holy Land, and this is where the dames really, their gifts, their charisms, their experience would come in, and with their particular role would help with dedication and service the Church in the Holy Land. So this is really so inspiring. Let's look at this question. Why is this order also called Equestrian Order? We're talking about knights and dames, but when I say, sometimes in conversation, somebody will ask me about, well, I've heard about the Equestrian Order. Do they still use horses? And that's what you think about when you think of the word equestrian, but no.
Well, the answer is because the Crusaders rode horses. They didn't have tanks at that point in time. So that's a very simple answer. I just add that a few years ago in one of our investitures in Oklahoma, they actually had a knight on a horse outside the church.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, again, it's the whole context of that knighthood of the Holy See, referring to the chivalric and knighty nature of the order. And interesting that you mentioned that in Oklahoma at an investiture gathering of knights and dames, that they would have that as they remember, our roots. This is Journeys of Hope, and our journey today is with the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem. My guests are members of that order. They're called Knight Dennis Alvey and Dame Barbara Alvey. They have been members for, over 35 years. They have an extreme experience, knowledge about the order. I've learned so much from them. I've learned not only from them and their role, I consider them role models in the order, but I have been to some of the events. My husband and I are now members as well of the Equestrian Order, thanks to some donors that made it possible, and we are quite honored. And I'm really also learning not only about the history, as I have become a member of this papal order, but the fact that their work is not often heard about off in the newspapers. It's almost like a hidden work, but at the same time, it's a glorious work. But it is universal because this order is universal. And I want to ask the question: how does one become a knight and dame of the Holy Sepulchre? Now, earlier, Dennis, you mentioned that you're not really go up and sign and say, "I want to become a knight and dame." You're invited.
That's correct. You're invited, and there's a nomination process. It goes basically, and I'll talk about locally, but you could apply this basically worldwide, where you're nominated, and your pastor if your pastor is not your nominator, he has to approve it. Then the Archbishop has to approve it. Then it goes to our lieutenancy headquarters in Houston, where Cardinal DiNardo has to approve it. It goes to Rome and to the Grand Prior of the Order, who is the Latin Patriarch, who has to approve it, and the Papal Chief of Staff, as well as the Grand Master of the Order. That's how you become a member. There's certain things you have to agree to do that.
Right, exactly. Well, let's continue with that thought, because I think it's very interesting for people to know exactly what is the process. We'll be right back. We're going to take a break. This is Journeys of Hope. Our journey is with the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem. My guests, Dennis and Barbara Alvey. I'm Mary Jane Fox. When we come back, we're going to continue our journey looking at what do they wear? Is there a uniform, a ceremonial dress? What do they do today in the Holy Land? And I want to hear your thoughts and your feelings. We'll be right back.
You're on the everyday journey of life, and sometimes it's tough to keep hope alive. Well, that's why Pilgrim Center of Hope is here for you. Not only does Pilgrim Center of Hope provide you programs like Journeys of Hope, but did you know you can also find other helpful media productions from Pilgrim Center of Hope on our website, pilgrimcenterofhope.org. Every first Friday, take an audio retreat with Jesus called Meet the Master. Every third Thursday, have a social with the saints. And our new quarterly series, Who is the Man of the Shroud, meets at the intersection of faith, true crime, science and medicine, history, art, and much more. Find it all at pilgrimcenterofhope.org or on your favorite podcast app. And keep hope alive in your daily journey. Pilgrim Center of Hope, guiding people to Christ.
Hello, this is Jason Nunez.
And Angela Ciolana, both from the media department at Pilgrim Center of Hope, who produce Journeys of Hope. Would you like to honor someone special in your life and support the production of this unique weekly series?
We are in need of monthly sponsors for upcoming Journeys of Hope programs to help cover some of the production costs by a donation. If you've sponsored a month of Journeys of Hope in the past, we thank you for your support.
Pilgrim Center of Hope has a donation wish list, and on it, several months of upcoming Journeys of Hope programming are still needing sponsors. If you're interested, please consider selecting a month that you wish to sponsor by going to pilgrimcenterofhope.org and under the Give menu, select Wish List.
You can also choose to dedicate your donation in honor or in memory of someone special.
Thank you for joining us in our mission.
Now, enjoy the rest of your journey.
This is Journeys of Hope. I'm Mary Jane Fox. Our journey today is a journey with the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem. My guests are members of that papal order, Dennis and Barbara Alvey. They've been members for over 35 years. They have a lot of experience and knowledge about this papal order. It's very interesting. I'm so glad you're joining us on this journey. Wait till you hear how a person becomes a knight and dame of the Holy Sepulchre. You're invited to join. You don't just walk up to someone and says, "Oh, I want to be a knight and dame." Well, that might be a desire, yes, but there is a official process, and Dennis is explaining that to us. Thank you, Dennis.
I explained the process, but you have to be a practicing Catholic, and in our lieutenancy, you have to be 35 years of age or older, and that's also applies to priests of the order, and that's per instructions from Cardinal Donato, our lieutenancy grand knight, our grand prior. You have to be married in the Catholic Church if you're married. Obviously, single members are also authorized to be members. You have to pledge an allegiance, or oath of allegiance to the Pope, which is actually administered when you're invested in the order. Some side accessory things: you have to buy a cape and beret for men and a mantilla for women in the order, who are called dames. You have to make an initial fixed rite of pilgrimage or rite of passage to become a member of the order, and that's a fixed amount. And then there's an annual voluntary donation, but there's some suggested amounts depending upon your rank. And you're asked to make a pilgrimage to the Holy Land during your lifetime. And Mary Jane has only made about 60 some of those.
Well, right.
We've only made 2. You're actually asked to attend the annual investiture, which covers the 4-state area, which is Texas, New Mexico, Arkansas, and Oklahoma, and to participate in our archdiocesan activities and functions, which include masses and funerals and social activities. And then finally, and I guess more importantly, you commit to the purposes of the order, which I think we're going to discuss later.
Right, exactly. You know, you mentioned the activities in the Archdiocese of San Antonio. The Archbishop of San Antonio, who is Archbishop Gustavo Garcia Sierra, is a member. And so he is always officiating, usually if he can, if he's in town, the masses for the knights and dames that we gather on certain feast days. And we'll talk about our liturgical feast days. So it's interesting to note that the bishops in many dioceses throughout the world are also members of the order. Is there a ceremonial dress or uniform that a knight and dame? You mentioned a cape, a beret, and mantilla. Can you describe that a little bit more?
Yes. First, I'd like to comment on your last question about our Archbishop. Before he ever came here, I wrote him a letter while he was still in Chicago and said, plan on becoming a member of the order. And so we were invited to his ordination here and actually went up on the altar. And so anyway, that's a side story. Yes. We each wear capes, that is the dames and knights. The dames' cape is black and with a bold, large Jerusalem cross on the cape. And the men's cape is white with a white collar. That's our ceremonial uniform, if you will.
With a large red Jerusalem cross as well.
Yes, that's right. I'm sorry.
And the beret is also quite impressive when the men wear this beret because it's black and it's sort of like stands on one side, flat on the other. But on the one side that it stands, there's also the Jerusalem cross emblem or embedded in the beret.
Yes.
And every woman who is a dame of the Holy Sepulchre has to wear a black mantilla when she wears her black cape at liturgies, gatherings, investitures. Yes. Well, speaking about the numbers of members of the Equestrian Order, there is an organization to it. We've mentioned terms like lieutenancy, and you mentioned Grand Knight. Can you sort of like help us to understand what does that mean? Because I think this is interesting. It relates to going back to the history of the Knights and Dames, specifically the Knights and the Crusades. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes. The head of the order is a cardinal. It's called the Grand Master of the order. And the head Grand Prior is always a Latin Patriarch, or Latin Patriarch. That's been so for a number of years, since 1847, as a matter of fact. I think I've got the right date. There's a Grand Magisterium that, kind of like the Board of Governors, that runs the order. Without going through all the titles of those, that's the world is broken up into lieutenancies, and usually a lieutenancy applies to a nation. In the case of the United States, we have 9 lieutenancies. We are in the Southwestern Lieutenancy here in San Antonio. The dioceses are then called sections. So we have a section leader, who are currently Janet and David Pollock.
Yeah, that's right. So, and you were once section leaders.
Yes, we were
right.
immediately before, for 10 years.
Right, that's incredible. That's a big responsibility. I remember that. You were section leaders when Tom and I were invested into the order several years ago. Looking at the members of the Equestrian Order and the organization, it's impressive, because we need order in our lives. We need structure, don't we? And when you see an order that dates back to the Crusades, we're looking, again, when Godfrey went to Jerusalem and took the Holy Sepulchre, defended the tomb of Christ. There was a purpose and there was a focus, and then from there on, there's an order and an organization and a structure. And rightly so, because that's what the church helps us with in our daily lives. We need that as well. And so we can be reminded that there is this papal order. It's called papal order because, again, initiated by the Pope officially and calling forth the knights and prayer. It really calls us to be reminded of order in our lives and structure in our lives. We don't want to call it so formally in our family, but some families will say we have to have structure or order in our daily lives, and I think it's a good thing. And I'm really, that's what has impressed me as well about the Equestrian Order of Jerusalem, the structure. And now, let's look at the purpose today. Now, today we're not riding the horses out to the Holy Jerusalem, but we are supporting, the members are supporting the church. Let's look at what are what each member are called to do.
Okay. Yeah, we're certainly not a military order anymore. Our main purposes are to support the Church of the Holy Land, the living stones of the Holy Land, in fact. Specifically, we're to pray for the church in the Holy Land and assure the living stones, the Christians of the Holy Land, are not forgotten. And we're asked to say the Memorare at least once a day. We're asked to uphold the rights of the Catholic Church in the Holy Land, and then to preserve or support the preservation and propagation of the faith in those lands. We're also asked to strengthen in our membership the practice of Christian life, in other words, to grow in our Christian life in fidelity to the Supreme Pontiff and according to the teachings of our church. And finally, financially, we're to sustain and aid the charitable, cultural, and social works and institutions of the Catholic Church of the Holy Land, and particularly those in the Latin Patriarchate of Jerusalem, which the order maintains the traditional ties. And I guess I should add there are a number of projects that the Latin Patriarch introduces every year that goes through a committee that's part of the Grand Magisterium.
Yes. Okay, so there again, that order is important, but wow, that's you mentioned some beautiful points. To pray for the church, the living stones, to uphold the rights of the church and the Holy Land, to support them and strengthen and sustain them. This is what the knights and dames do for the church and the Holy Land. Now, the prayer, the Memorare, there is a prayer that the knights and dames pray as when they gather together. We have a specific prayer that we pray. The Memorare is a prayer written by a long time ago by St. Bernard, and it begins with, "Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection was left unaided." And it continues. It's a beautiful prayer. It's a very powerful prayer to Our Lady, but again, asking for her intercession for the entire church. So again, the knights and ladies, or knights and dames, are constantly are really keeping this in mind in their daily life. It becomes part of who they are. This is something important to know. Some of the activities. Now, you mentioned the Latin Patriarchate of Jerusalem. That's a different term. Maybe people don't think about. Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem is it's equivalent to the Archbishop. We can say Archbishop. He is today. His name. He's an Italian. Actually, there have been Latin patriarchs that were Palestinian, and they're of course, but they're like the Archbishop. And so as he meets with the governing board and says, "This is what's needed in the Holy Land. Help us," or pray about it, discern, and then this goes out to all of the lieutenancies. This is some of what we're going to look at right now. But before we do, I want to ask you a question, because Dennis and Barbara, I wanted to ask you this earlier before we get into the works. You have been to Jerusalem. You walked inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. What did you feel? I mean, what were your feelings when you first walked in? I mean, not only as a Christian, but as a knight and day.
I've felt awe at the size of the structure, but yet that it encompassed both the place where Christ was crucified and where he was buried and rose. I was, I guess, taken aback with what I'd call the ornateness of the place, and the fact that there are so many religions, all of the Catholic faith, if you will, but not Roman Catholic, including the Roman Catholics, and their presence in the actual church. As an aside, even though it's a Christian structure, the key to the building is held by a Muslim who has to come and open the door every day.
Right.
So
exactly.
it was, I guess, shock and awe, if you will, and to just feel the presence of God and Jesus, that he was actually here. The last time we were there was very important. We were there just as COVID broke out. And we actually had our Mass inside where the tomb is. It's just Mary Jane knows this, but it's a very small room, but we were all able to fit in there. And I'm a lector normally at our church, so I happened to be the lector chosen for that day. And then when I came back, I didn't lecture for a long time because we didn't have no Mass. So I said this might be the last time in my life I would ever lecture. So that's a long story, probably a little more than.
No, but it's
than
very
you
good. It's
wanted.
very interesting.
Well, I wasn't sure, how to handle it when I walked in, because I'm thinking, what do we do? I don't know. And then I see the slab, and I just knelt down and kissed it.
Exactly.
And you want to cry when you look around and you think, I can't believe I'm here.
Right, exactly.
It's such an honor to be able to go there and actually see. And I wish every knight and dame could do that. But some people aren't able financially or health-wise to go there and have that experience. But being in the tomb and having Mass, that was really special.
Well, it's something that we cannot articulate. You'd almost have to be there to experience it, to walk into the tomb, which is covered with a small edifice within the large basilica to protect the tomb, to walk in, to kiss it, to touch it, to receive the body and blood of Christ in Eucharist. Oh my gosh, It just sounds overwhelming just talking about it. And so, yes, we do invite people to go on a Holy Land pilgrimage if you can. If you are going to go, always choose Pilgrim Center of Hope. Pilgrim Center of Hope is the way to go. But I just wanted to ask that question because it was something that I've been, I think people need to hear from your heart. How was it? And of course, there's an incredible history there, and we have further Journeys of Hope programs and podcasts that you can hear more about the history of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem. As we continue our journey here with the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem, the pilgrim shall, the knights and dames, when you said that they're called to go to the Holy Land, on pilgrimage if they possibly can. And when they do, they meet with the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem. And there is a decoration that they get, or some. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, it's called the pilgrim shell, and it's actually a form of a scallop shell, if you will. In ancient times, when pilgrims traveled, they wore that shell primarily for those who were, if they were returning from the pilgrimage site, people would notice their shell and know that they had been pilgrims. And side story, I guess, St. James was in Spain, in Santiago, and there were a number of Spanish pilgrims that went there after we couldn't go to the Holy Land for a while. And there was a plethora of seashells available for them to take on their pilgrimages. It's usually worn on the evening dress and full decorations. It's placed above all of our other decorations. And it's the only decorations which may be worn outside of either the knights or lady's cape. Dame's cape.
Yes. Well, it's an interesting. It's called the ancient badge of a pilgrim, as you mentioned. But this pilgrim shell is the, as you said, the shell, the scallop shell, silver. But inside, in the middle, is the red Jerusalem cross. It's a pin that can be worn, as you said, on your cape or outside. This is what one receives from the Latin Patriarch in Jerusalem. Let's move on to the work of the Holy Land. I believe that the Knights and Dames of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem, really, the order provides a good percentage of the projects, the work of the Latin Patriarch. Specifically, let's mention some, like parishes, churches, community centers. Have you seen yourself a couple in person that have, through the financial support of the order, have actually benefited?
We have not seen. I guess most of the money goes to churches. I shouldn't say we haven't seen churches, but orphanages, elderly homes, if you will, convents, seminarians. And in terms of seminarians, it's not in Jerusalem, but we've been to Bethlehem University. We were there the first time. Unfortunately, last time we were there, when we were scheduled to go, Bethlehem was closed off because of COVID. But that is a tremendous experience, and Holy Sepulchre, Order of the Holy Sepulchre, is prime donator of funds to keep that university going. And as a side thing, what most of us probably don't understand is that the majority of the students are not Christian, they're Muslim.
That's right.
Even though they're in a Catholic university.
And I'll tell you, it's really something that is a sad reality. It's a reality, but we need to. That's why it's important to support the church in the Holy Land. When we say church, we mean the living stones, the Christians living there, because of the situation there. There's less than 1.5% of the Christian population today in the Holy Land. So that's why Dennis made that statement that Bethlehem University, founded by Pope Paul VI during his visit in the 1960s, wanted a Catholic university in the West Bank, in the Holy Land. It indeed is very fruitful, but they are getting many of the people, the values, the education, degrees that the students are receiving are beautiful, and many of the professors are Christian. Many are there's some who are also Muslim, but they're all united in the effort of education. You mentioned also seminaries. There is a seminary, and they have in Bethlehem, which is the Roman Catholic Seminary, the Latin Seminary. There are 40 Latin Patriarchate schools. That means 40 schools. And let me define Latin Patriarchate geographically. You know how we have the Archdiocese of San Antonio, it covers a large geographic area. Okay, so we have in the Latin Patriarchate, it encompasses the state of Israel, the Palestinian territories, Jordan, and the island of Cyprus. Now, that's not really a large geographical area. The state of Israel is about the size of New Jersey, the state of New Jersey. But within that, archdiocese, the Latin Patriarchate, there's 40 schools, Catholic schools. And Dennis mentioned a lot of these, the students are Muslim, but they are getting the Christian values and the virtues. It's united with other Christian students. We do supply humanitarian assistance for medical supplies or for food when needed, hospitals. I have seen a couple of places where some schools in Bethlehem, but there's also recently a Terra Santa Museum located on Via Dolorosa that's functioned by the Franciscans, and they are now we're getting funds from the Equestrian Order of Jerusalem. And what does this museum offer us? Not only the history of the Holy Land, archaeological objects, but also a multimedia Via Dolorosa, encompassing the 2,000 years of Christianity in Jerusalem. Can you imagine that? It's really amazing. And again, it's located on Via Dolorosa. So immense work. And Dennis said a majority, I would say probably 80% of the budget of the Latin Patriarch depends on the Knights and Dames of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem. Incredible.
Could I just add kind of a side story to that? You mentioned what the what the Latin Patriarch encompasses the countries. On our last trip or pilgrimage, we went to Jordan, and while I'd say most of it was non-religious in function, we actually had a mass in a church in Amman that was built with funds from the Holy Sepulchre.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful. When you see that, I call it a spiritual proud. You're proud that, yes, I'm glad that you're seeing that with your own eyes and touching the fruit. But us who maybe have never been to Jordan, or others who have not been to Jordan, we can say, praise be God for this work. Now, there's a patroness, Our Lady of Palestine, that has the Knights and Dames have embraced. And her feast day is when? And when is her feast day?
It's October 25th.
Okay. And so Our Lady of Palestine is a beautiful title of Our Lady. Certainly that is something that we need to keep in mind when you think of the Holy Land. You think of the Knights and Dames, Our Lady of Palestine, October 25th. But there's another liturgical feast day that the Knights and Dames honor by usually gathering for Mass, if possible. And that is the exaltation of the cross, which falls on September 14th on the liturgical calendar. So that's we honor the Holy Cross by which Christ redeemed the world. And of course, it is the Knights and Dames of the Holy Sepulchre that still hold up the truth of, again, evangelizing through this whole the salvation plan of God. And the exaltation of the Holy Cross is an important feast day.
Can I add just an anecdote to that?
Please.
Two anecdotes, as a matter of fact. When we were section reps, I went to the Archbishop and said, we need to be doing some things that we're not doing now. And he came up with a suggestion which we followed for a number of years. You didn't mention it, but St. Helena is another one of our feast day, as well as St. Pius the 12th, or 10th, I'm sorry. So he said, why don't we have a Mass at St. Helena's on the exaltation of the cross? And I recall that you led our
walking
prayers
pilgrimage
at the large cross at the church before that 1 year at least.
I'm so glad you mentioned that.
Yes.
I'm so glad you suggested that.
That was the Archbishop's idea, and I thought it was
through your
wonderful
suggestion.
The other anecdote is we actually, the last time we were in the Holy Land, we were at the Queen of Palestine Church for Mass.
Oh, that's right. And there's a shrine that's there dedicated to her, and it's been renovated by the Knights and Dames. Thank you both. Thank you, Dennis, Barbara, for joining me on this journey. It's been incredible, inspirational, educational. I'm really very, very touched by all of what you have done and together what you've shared. Thank you so much for being with me. I'd like to, again, just welcome you to know more about the Equestrian Order. Go to our website, pilgrimcenterofhope.org. There is a trifold pamphlet about the order. There are many saints that have belonged to this order. Blessed Bartolo Longo, Duke Albert IV of Austria, King Louis XIV of France, among many others, Pope St. Pius X. Learn more about this incredible papal order. And as always, our jewel for the journey that we give you as our tradition is from Pope Francis. And this is it. Making the Holy Land known means transmitting the fifth gospel, that is, the historical environment and geographical area in which the Word of God was revealed and then made flesh in Jesus of Nazareth, for us and for our salvation. Beautiful quote of Pope Francis. Join me as we pray. I'd like to actually pray a prayer that we as Knights and Dames pray to Our Lady of Palestine. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. O Mary, Immaculate, gracious Queen of heaven and earth, we beseech thee to turn a comforting glance upon Palestine, which more than any other country belongs to you, since you have graced it with your birth, your virtues, and your sorrows, and from there has given the Redeemer to the world. Watch, therefore, with special protection over thy native country. Obtain for us all that we may serve the Lord in sanctity and justice during all the days of our life, so that by the merits of Jesus and with your motherly aid, we may pass at last from this earthly Jerusalem to the splendors of the heavenly one. Amen.